Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ace Afrikaans, where today we're going to take a look at a complex subject and we're going to teach you everything you need to know about conjunctions. So, conjunctions in Afrikaans work very similar to every other language, where we put it in between two sentences to join them to make a single sentence, which is known as a complex sentence because it's made up of more than one sentence. We group various conjunctions in Afrikaans into three different groups because they affect the first verb position in the sentence coming after the conjunction in different ways. So, three different groups because they affect the first verb position in the second sentence in different ways. I'll focus on the punctuation that's required for each of these in a separate video when we do punctuation. So let's take a look at the first group. Group 1 conjunctions is what we call them. Now, these conjunctions don't change anything. We simply just put the conjunction in between our two sentences and nothing changes. There are stock standard conjunctions: maar, which means but, en, which means and, of, which means or, want, which means because, and doch, which means however. Some people like to use the mnemonic meow dog to remember these simple conjunctions. So an example, ek skryf elke dag in my boek. I write every day in my book. Ek lees elke aand 'n boek. I read every night a book. I can just join together with en. Ek skryf elke dag in my boek en ek lees elke aand 'n boek. Nothing in terms of word order changes in my sentence. Just be mindful that the second sentence does not maintain that capital for ek, even though I in English always maintains its capitalization. In Afrikaans, ek does not. All right, so part of conjunctions that don't change the position of the verb 1 in the sentence after are two-part conjunctions, or sometimes called double-barreled conjunctions. Their function is to eliminate repetition, so let's take a look at how they work. The examples that we're going to be working with, of, which is the Afrikaans equivalent of either or, and yes, that little accent sign on the O does make a difference. It helps us to distinguish it from normal of, which means or. Nog, neither nor, and again, the accent sign is important because it helps us to distinguish between just a plain old nog, which means more. Beide en, which means both and. Sowel as, which means as well as. But we can also use sowel as a normal conjunction, which isn't a two-part or a double-barrel conjunction, in which case it will just mean as well as, which is synonymous with en. So for our examples, we're going to stick with of, either or, because all of them follow the same pattern and they can be applied in the same way. So let's take a look at ek drink elke dag water, ek drink elke dag koffie. I drink water every day and I drink coffee every day. Now there's lots of repetition in that sentence with only two words being unique. I'm going to call these the unique elements, water and koffie. My repeated elements, ek drink elke dag, we want to get rid of all the repetition. So we're going to try and say, every day I drink either water or coffee, eliminating that repetition. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our two-part conjunction or a double-barrel conjunction and we're going to attach it to the front of our two unique elements. And we're going to write them together, of water, of koffie. Now, depending if my repeated element is at the beginning or the end of my sentence, I'm going to keep it where it was. So ek drink elke dag water is at the front of both of my sentences. So in my answer, I'm going to write it at the front, getting rid of the second repetition. Ek drink elke dag of water of koffie. I drink every day either water or coffee. Now, the repetition can be at the front or at the back of your sentence. So in this example, you'll see that my two unique elements are now at the front. Sy drink elke dag water. She drinks every day water. Hy drink elke dag water. And he drinks everyday water, obviously meaning he drinks water every day. So, drink elke dag water is my repeated element and it is at the back or at the end of both of my sentences. So I'm going to drop the one that is not going to be at the end of my eventual answer. In my answer, I'm going to attach my two-part conjunction to the front of each of my unique elements and place them together. And yes, you can use a capitalized accented O, of sy of hy, either she or he drink elke dag water, drinks water every day. And you can see that repeated element I only have once now, and because it was repeated at the back of my original sentences, it is now at the back of my final sentence. Now, these repeated elements we can find at both the front or the back simultaneously, and they're going to be in my final answer or in my final question, final statement, they're going to be at the front or the back depending on where they were repeated. So in my two separate sentences, ek drink elke dag water in die park, ek drink elke dag koffie in die park, I can see water and coffee are my unique elements. Ek drink elke dag water is a repeated element at the front of the sentence, so it's going to be only at the front of my final sentence. In die park is a repeated element that is at the back of my two sentences, so in my answer, it will only appear in the back. So firstly, I make sure that my two-part conjunctions are attached to my two unique elements and they are placed together, of water of coffee, either water or coffee. Ek drink elke dag was the repeated element at the front of both of my sentences, so now in my answer statement, it's going to be only at the front. In die park was a repeated element in both at the back of both of my initial sentences, and now it's at the back of my final statement. So as I mentioned before, all of these use the same sentence structure. So let's take a look at what that would look like. So my initial sentence, ek drink elke dag water in die park, en ek drink elke dag koffie in die park. Ek drink elke dag of water of koffie in die park for either or. Nog water, nog koffie for neither nor. Beide water en koffie, both water and coffee. Sowel as well water as coffee. I know that sounds a little bit odd because the English sentence construction isn't the same. And finally, ek drink elke dag water, sowel as koffie in die park. Now this is an example of when sowel as is used synonymously with en. Now let's take a look at group 2 conjunctions. These conjunctions change the sentence directly after it to move the first verb position to the beginning of the sentence. Some people also say that it moves it next to the conjunction, but let's rather say it moves it to the front of its own sentence. So these are the examples. They're not all of the group 2 conjunctions, but they're the most common ones. Dan meaning then, daarna meaning thereafter, dus meaning thus, daarom of derhalve meaning therefore, al meaning even though or although. It's a very nice efficient word in Afrikaans. Toch meaning even so, en gevolglik meaning as a result or consequently. So in our example, ek drink water, ek drink koffie. I can see, or I just initially identify my first verb in my second sentence because that's the sentence that's going to change. Group 2 is going to move that to the front of its own sentence. So in my answer, ek drink water, dan, then, being a group 2 conjunction, moves that first verb position to the front of its sentence. Ek drink water, dan drink ek koffie. And you'll note again that the ek loses its capitalization because it is not similar to the I in English that maintains it. All right, let's take a look at what we need to do when we begin a sentence with a group 2 conjunction. Ek het 'n koppie koffie, ek maak nog. So I just initially identified the first verb in both of these sentences. I begin my sentence with the conjunction al, even though. So my answer would be, even though I have a cup of coffee, I make more. Al het ek 'n koppie koffie, maak ek nog. So the group 2 rule, meaning I move the verb to the beginning of the sentence, is applied to both sentences. It's important to know that logically, al is the only conjunction in group 2 that can work at the beginning of a sentence. So just remember, if you want to use even though at the start of a sentence, or if you're meant to, then it is the only group 2 conjunction that's going to function like this. So if we want a nice little formula to remember all of this, all at the beginning of a sentence means that in the first sentence directly after it, my verb 1 position will move to the front of its sentence. And in my second sentence, the verb 1 position will move to the front of its sentence. And here you can already see why conceptually we shouldn't be saying that the verb moves in next to the conjunction, because we're not going to have two conjunctions in every sentence. Now let's take a look at group 3 conjunctions. And this is by far one of the most important areas in Afrikaans, because a lot of our language interacts like group 3 when it moves verbs around. If we have a group 3 conjunction in between two sentences, the verb 1 position is going to move to the verb 2 position. And I want to just remind you of the notes that we made when we went over word order, that there is a particular order that verbs need to be written in because multiple verbs can gather in this verb 2 position close to the back of our sentence. So the priority or the order in which verbs need to be written, if they gather there, would firstly be sal, then all of our modal verbs, then any main verbs, and then our exceptions. And it's very, very important that we now start noting these exceptions because they're going to start playing a bigger role. Is as in is, was, was, wees being be, het, our past tense indicator, and this is going to be critical, in word meaning to become. Let's take a look at some examples. As meaning if, dat meaning that, omdat meaning because, totdat meaning until, voordat before, totdat and until. You can see that a lot of dats or words that contain dat are in group 3, and it's an easy way to remember most of them. There are ones that I don't list here, but these are the ones we're going to be working with today. It's also important to note that all question words are also group 3 conjunctions, whether we want them to be or not. So if we don't place a question word at the start of a sentence, rather we put it in the middle of a sentence, then without wanting them to, we need to remember that they immediately operate as a conjunction and move my verbs accordingly. So if I just have a normal sentence, it is the day when, dit is die dag wanneer. Now, it's quite innocent to say it's the day when something happened, but as soon as that when in Afrikaans enters my sentence, it immediately functions as a conjunction. So just bear in mind. Let's take a look at an example. Ek drink water, ek drink koffie. I immediately just identify my verb 1 because it is going to move to the second verb position. Ek drink water omdat ek koffie drink. That verb 1, drink, moving to the second verb position. Let's take a look at an example where I now have a verb already in the second verb position. Ek drink water, and my second sentence, ek wou koffie drink. I wanted to drink coffee. So if I now place my group 3 conjunction omdat, because, in that position, ek drink water, omdat ek koffie wou drink. That first verb, wou, does not move past a verb 2 that is already occupying the second verb slot because of the order that they need to be written in. Sal, then all of my modal verbs, so that's wou, wou is a modal verb or an auxiliary verb, then my main verbs, so drink, drink is a main verb. So my order of my verbs in my second verb position is correct. Now let's take a look at an example where we have an exception. Ek drink water, ek het koffie gedrink. Now we can immediately notice that het, even though we call them exceptions, we call them exceptions purely because they move past any other verbs that are already present in that verb 2 position. So in my answer, omdat ek koffie gedrink het. So that het is placed last in my verb 2 position because my order is sal, then my modal verbs, then main verbs, and then these exceptions, of which het is one, meaning to have. Let's take a look at how we would start a sentence with a group 3 conjunction. And here we're not limited to only one. We can start a sentence with any of our conjunctions. I will begin with my group 3 conjunction. The sentence immediately following that group 3 conjunction, the verb is going to, or the first verb position is going to move to the second verb position. And again, here we need to remember the order in which words are written. The second sentence, however, is now going to behave differently. That verb 1 position is going to move to the front of its own sentence. Sometimes teachers will say that if we begin with group 3, the verbs move towards each other, but there's still that infinitive of group sentence 1 that could be in the way. So rather learn to speak in a way or think in a way of that first verb position and second verb position. And yes, infinitives won't always be present in our sentence, but when they are, we need to be able to manage that effectively. So let's take a look at an example. Ek drink my koppie koffie. I've identified verb 1. Ek is wakker. I am awake. I've identified verb 1. So if I now begin with a group 3 conjunction, omdat, verb 1 in the first sentence, drink, is moved to the second verb position. And in the second sentence, verb 1 is moved to the front of its own sentence. Omdat ek my koppie koffie drink, is ek wakker. Because I drink my cup of coffee, I am awake. Let's take a look at a more complex example. Ek het my koppie koffie gedrink. So here we have verb 1 identified het, but we already have a verb 2 as well, gedrink. This is a very standard past tense sentence. Ek is wakker, I am awake. I've also identified verb 1. So in my answer, omdat ek my koppie koffie gedrink het, again, I'm remembering that het is one of my exceptions. In that verb 2 position, it is written last. Omdat ek my koppie koffie gedrink het, is ek wakker. All right, let's take a look at a special case, and that is for the conjunction nadat, which means after. And logically, the sentence after nadat needs to be written in the past tense. Let's take a look what this looks like. Ek drink koffie, ek word wakker. So if I now use nadat in my sentence, the sentence directly after nadat needs to be written in the past tense. Ek drink water nadat ek wakker geword het. But there's a lot of change that happens in that second sentence. So let's take a look how we got there. Ek word wakker was my original sentence. If I change that into the past tense, which is what nadat requires me to do, it's not optional, it would change into ek het wakker geword. Now I have my real verb 1 het, and that's now going to change because nadat is a group 3 conjunction. So het is now going to move to the second verb position, and because I know the order in which my verbs are written in the second verb position, het is going to be written last. Sodat is another conjunction that requires special attention because it needs the word kan or can logically in the sentence after it. Sometimes in our sentences, this is just naturally present because it is so logical, but sometimes it is not given in order to test this. So in my two sentences, ek drink koffie, ek doen my werk, I drink coffee, I do my work. We're going to try and join these two sentences with sodat, so that. I drink coffee so that I do my work, but logically it's going to require that can so that I can do my work. Ek drink water sodat being my group 3 conjunction, but I've already inserted the kan into that sentence, and there's a couple of steps that went into getting there. Ek doen my werk was my original sentence. If I now need to insert that auxiliary verb kan, auxiliary verbs need to be written in the first verb position. So that's what I did. I put my auxiliary verb kan into the first verb position, moving doen to the second verb position because that's where all my excess verbs go. And then I apply the group 3 rule, sodat, kan, moving to verb 2 spot. But remembering the order in which my verbs go in the group in the second verb position, first sal, then auxiliary verbs, and then main verbs. So because kan is an auxiliary verb, it is moved to verb 2, but it doesn't move past doen because doen is just a normal main verb. So there are a couple of interactions that we now get now that we know how conjunctions work. Past tense is going to change both of my sentences and not just one of them. Similar to nadat, but it's going to require both of my sentences to change. So if I have a sentence that is already joined by a conjunction, ek skryf elke dag in my boek en ek lees elke aand 'n boek. I write every day in my book and I read every night a book. I'm going to have to change both of them. Ek het elke dag in my boek geskryf en ek het elke aand 'n boek gelees. These are two past tense sentences that are joined, and because it's a group 1 conjunction, I don't need to worry too much about how they change. All I need to do is remember to change both of them. Now, we can also, as I taught or as we explained in the video on past tense, we can quite often begin with a time word or an adverbial phrase of time at the start of our sentence, which in this case, the example is verlede jaar. I need to now also remember that my first verb position needs to stay in the second slot. So verlede jaar, now I need my verb, het, and then only my subject, ek, elke dag in my boek geskryf. And now in my second sentence, there's no time word that is now at the start of my second sentence, so it can just stay the same. The fact that my first sentence begins with an adverbial phrase of time does not carry over into my second sentence. Let's take a look at interaction number 2, which is also an interaction that is used extremely often. It is tested constantly because it is also so common. It is known as the dawn rule, or some teachers teach it as the wand rule as well. And it is basically a mnemonic for 4 conjunctions that have a past tense form. Dan, meaning then, which is group 2. As, meaning if, as in group 3. Wanneer, meaning when, which is group 3. No, meaning now, which is group 2. All 4 of these conjunctions in the past tense are 2. I know it can be a little bit confusing, so that's why I added their groups in as well. It's a great way to remember 4 very common conjunctions as groups, but please also note that when they change into 2, they will maintain their groups, which is why on a lot of conjunction lists, you will see 2 on the group 2 and on the group 3 list, because it is a past tense form of something that is in group 2 or in group 3, depending on which word was its present tense. Let's take a look at how this operates. Ek skryf elke dag in my boek, dan gaan ek slaap. So this sentence, I've just highlighted verb 1, skryf, in my first sentence. There's my conjunction, dan, and then gaan, being the first verb in my second sentence, was already moved to the correct position because dan is group 2, it's at the front of its own sentence. But what if I now change this into the past tense? I'm going to begin with a adverbial phrase of time, verlede jaar. Het ek elke dag in my boek geskryf, toe het ek gaan slaap. Let's just talk through what happened in that first sentence. Ek skryf elke dag in my boek. We did on the previous discussion we did. Ek het elke dag in my boek geskryf is a very straightforward past tense, with my first verb being written in the second position after my time phrase. Verlede jaar het ek elke dag in my boek geskryf. Dan, because it is one of my 4 dawn conjunctions, changed into its past tense too. It maintained being group 2. Now that second sentence, it looks like a lot happened in that sentence. I had to change it into the past tense as well, remember? So let's take a look what happened. Dan gaan ek slaap. If I remove the influence that group 2 conjunction had on that sentence, the sentence would be ek gaan slaap. All I did was move that verb 1 back into the position after the subject. Ek gaan slaap is subject, then my first verb, then my second verb. Now, because I want to change this into the past tense, het is going to become my new past tense indicator, verb 1. I want to move gaan to the second verb position, but slaap is already there. Gaan isn't one of my exceptions, So even though, strictly technically speaking, it is now in the second verb position, it doesn't look like it's there because my sentence is very simple. There are no times or manners or objects or places in the way. So ek het gaan slaap. Now I can apply that group 2 principle again and move het, which is my first verb, to the front of the sentence. Toe het ek gaan slaap. Let's take a look at another example. Ek skryf elke dag in my boek. I write every day in my book. Wanneer ek gaan slaap. When I go sleep. So immediately we recognize wanneer as one of my dawn conjunctions. Ek gaan slaap we've spoken about already. So in my answer, I begin with an adverbial phrase of time. Verlede jaar het ek elke dag in my boek geskryf. Again, maintaining my first verb in the second position. Het ek elke dag in my boek geskryf. Wanneer has a past tense form. Wanneer changes into to. Now remember, the tense of my sentence was dictated at the front by that verlede jaar. That's why we're changing it. Wanneer changed into to. Ek gaan slaap het. Now, this looks a little bit different. So let's take a look at what happened in that second sentence. Ek gaan slaap. Gaan, being my verb 1, is technically already in the second verb position. Wanneer is group 3. And group 3's rule says I need to move first verb 1s into the second verb position. Slaap is also a verb 2. So even though gaan looks like it's currently in the first verb position, it is in the second verb position along with slaap because of that group 3 rule. Ek gaan slaap would then be my normal sentence if I remove the influence that that group 3 conjunction had from it, gaan being verb 1, slaap being verb 2. And if I change it into the past tense, I add a het, my past tense indicator. Gaan, well, it's kind of already in verb 2, so already know what it looks like when it's going to be in verb 2. So gaan slaap is the correct word order there. I'm not going to move gaan past slaap because verbs do not move, or normal verbs do not move past each other. They maintain the normal order that they were written in. And now I can take that sentence back into my group 3 conjunction, knowing that het is the first verb that I need to move. And because to used to be wanneer, it is still group 3. Het is now written in the second verb position, and because it is my exception, and I know the order in which words stack in my verb 2 position, sal, then my modal verbs, then my normal verbs, and then my exceptions, of which het is one, I know that het moves to the last position in that verb 2 slot. So this is quite a complex example where we have 3 verbs gathering in our second verb position. Let's take a look at what happens when we now begin with a dawn word or a dawn conjunction. It's a very common and very easy way to change a sentence into a past tense form. So let's begin with wanneer ek gaan slaap, lees ek 'n boek. When I go sleep, I read a book. That initial sentence has already been changed into its group 3 form. So wanneer ek gaan slaap, gaan, even though again it looks like it's in verb 1, it is in the second verb position. It just didn't move past slaap because slaap is already a verb in the second verb position. Lees ek 'n boek. Lees, being my verb 1, must move to the front of that sentence because that's the rule when I begin a sentence with a group 3 conjunction. When I change that sentence into the past tense, I don't necessarily need an adverbial phrase of time. All I do is I change wanneer into to. And this might seem a little strange, but it's an extremely common way of speaking. Toe ek gaan slaap het. That het moving to the back of its own sentence. We explained why that happened in our previous slide. Het ek 'n boek gelees. Again, het coming from changing that second sentence into the past tense. Ek lees 'n boek is what it would look like without that group 3 conjunction influence. I add het into my sentence, moving lees to verb 2, gelees, and now I can move that back into my sentence. Taking a look, I need that group 3 rule to apply, moving het to the front of the sentence. Conjunctions are very complicated and they've got many interactions. But remember, we still need to study vocabulary so that we know which words come where. Conjunctions are incredibly important to study to know which conjunctions belong to which groups so that we can move them correctly. Keep practicing your vocabulary, and I hope to see you all again next time.